Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Eric Mackey,
And I'm Christine Downs.
and we're trainers for Northeast PBIS. We're going to be talking about developing a school-wide acknowledgement system. The content for this training was developed by Northeast PBIS and the Center on Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. Here is our roadmap for getting started with PBIS or school-wide PBIS at the Tier 1 universal level. Hopefully by the time that you're watching this video, you and your team have gone through the first 5 steps and have taught your class-wide expectations. Today, we'll be focused on how you can create a range of strategies to encourage and strengthen the behaviors that we want to see in students. Please do take a moment to go to the Getting Started workbook and go to section 2B6 and follow along. So again, here are the key steps to teaching any content. In prior videos, we've already talked about how to identify and define school-wide expectations or values for your school, as well as how to teach and prompt the behaviors that we want to see students use. Now we're going to focus on how we can monitor and use feedback, especially acknowledgement, otherwise called reinforcement, to let students know that they are behaving appropriately and to encourage them to continue doing so.
So what we know from behavioral science is that if we introduce something desired, like praise or a ticket or a homework pass to a student, when they do a desired behavior, like raising their hand or being on time or consistently handing in their homework, the student is more likely to do that desired behavior again. We also know that if we give students something they want, like escape from class or to get out of math work, when they refuse to do work or act out, they are also more likely to do that particular behavior again. So if we do something that results in a behavior happening again, that's considered reinforcement. We have to strongly consider how we are reinforcing behaviors we want, or not reinforcing them sometimes, and keep reinforcing from the behavior we don't want.
So, Christine, you probably get this question a lot too, but shouldn't students just behave without needing to be reinforced?
Well, that would be nice, wouldn't it? But sometimes we all need a little incentive to do things. We might love our jobs, but if we don't get paid at the end of the week, we may be a little less motivated to go. So an acknowledgement system definitely increases the motivation to do certain skills. Okay. So we want to use reinforcement because it has lots of good benefits for our students, including facilitating a positive relationship between a teacher and students, right? Because the teacher is providing more opportunities to give feedback on what they've done correctly. It helps to clarify what we want from students so they can be successful because they know exactly what they should do. And it improves the chances that they're actually going to do that. It also reduces the time we're spending on redirecting behaviors and using discipline. And this allows us to stay in our roles as a positive, proactive educator rather than a reactive disciplinarian.
So let's review some key features of acknowledgement or reinforcement systems. Overall, we want to make sure that our systems are relevant, they're efficient, they're predictable, and they're available. With regards to being relevant, we want to make sure that our systems are tied to our expectations and that they're actually motivating and reinforcing to the students. So they should be appropriate to age, to development, to culture. So that means having multiple options for students and changing them up from time to time. If students don't find the options to be motivating, then they won't likely change their behaviors. They should also be efficient in that they should be easy for staff and faculty to deliver them. If your system isn't easy to give, then your staff and faculty won't likely give them. The system should also be predictable in that all students should be able to expect and receive reinforcement with regularity. You should build towards layered systems that are delivered daily, monthly, quarterly, etc. And finally, there should be systems available for both students and staff so that both populations are feeling seen and appreciated.
Eric, how would you recommend identifying what's valuable to the student population?
Great question. Sometimes our efforts as adults kind of miss the mark. So I often recommend asking the students themselves. And we can do that through surveys or maybe talking with student leadership teams or just a select group of students. I often like to recommend going to those students who might not necessarily be in the leadership groups, but might be kind of social leaders, the people that students tend to follow. It's important to ask them too. Here are just a few examples of acknowledgement systems. Notice how public and visible they are. Such systems can act as helpful reminders of what students can earn for which behaviors. Also notice that there are acknowledgement systems for staff in here. The adults need praise too.
Oh. One of my favorite reinforcers is positive postcards home. That really kind of pulls in the family and they can all celebrate the student. Quick question, what if teachers already have an acknowledgement system? They often are confused. Do we make them abandon it? Do we pull it in? What's your advice there?
Certainly. We want to encourage teachers to have their systems. And oftentimes we can take those class systems and expand them school-wide, which would be great. But the important part is that if they have those systems, that they don't conflict with the school-wide system. Really, we want to make sure that there's a system in place that all students have access to. So if their system can plug into that, great. We just don't want teachers to be using a system that is in place of a school-wide system so that there are students who just don't have access to that school-wide system.
Right. Okay, so here's a really good example of taking the acknowledgement system and organizing it to ensure everybody knows what's going on. They've created documentation with instructions, and that's what we want teams to do. This one is a really good example from Fulton Academy. It's done in a matrix style, which is very PBIS. It shows the type of reinforcement. There are high frequency, intermittent, and long-term reinforcers on here. It states what the students are earning, who should provide it, when it should happen, where it should happen, the actual procedures for how it works. You get the ticket, you turn it in for certain other things. It talks about who should receive it. And really most importantly is the purpose of the reinforcement, which I really like that's on here. Because sometimes some specific reinforcers might be used to acknowledge a specific behavior like on time to class. And you can see here that there's high frequency reinforcers that actually can get turned into intermittent kind of reinforcement by collecting them and picking a few out of a jar once a month, or saving them all up until a class or grade level fills up the bucket and then they get a prize. And we really want to remember to have those long-term celebrations so the entire school can participate in celebrating accomplishments. So you definitely want to review with your staff some important considerations when delivering the reinforcers. We always want to think about the student's phase of learning. If they're learning a new skill or task, we're going to use lots of reinforcement, and then we can pull back as they master it. We're always going to provide some so they know it's still important. We always want to consider the culture of our student body when we're creating our reinforcement. And we want to make sure every student has access to the system, not just the really well-behaved students and not just the students who struggle. Everyone should have opportunity. We want to be as specific as possible when we are delivering it so they know why they're getting it. So if we just say good job and walk away, they might not know what they did. We want to tell them what they did, and if we can link it back to the expectation or value, that's even better. So I might say, Eric, I really appreciate how you're listening right now. That shows great respect. He knows what he did right and what value it's connected to. And remind staff, right, provide more attention for the desired social skill than for the problem behavior, because we get more of what we pay attention to. And lastly, please don't use rewards to bribe or threaten students or take away rewards. That just creates problems with the relationship between the adult and the student, or it could escalate behavior.
So Christine, a question that I often get is whether extrinsic motivation is harmful to students.
Well, based on the research, there is no negative inherent property to giving reinforcement to create motivation. And even Alfie Cohen, who is not a big fan of extrinsic rewards or motivators, says they can really be helpful when the task is not especially interesting. So like walking in the hall or standing in the cafeteria line. Not so interesting, but the reinforcers kind of help create the habit. And before you know it, students are just walking on the right side of the hallway because they've built that habit. So it does help in that way.
Absolutely. All right, thank you for taking the time to learn about developing school-wide acknowledgement systems. So when you have time, bring your team together and go to section 2B6 in your workbook and work towards completing the acknowledgement worksheet, and also think about developing instructions that you can distribute to your staff and to your substitutes. Also identify some systems for providing professional development and coaching support to your staff as needed with regards to acknowledgement systems. Be sure to take time to update your action plan as appropriate. And for more information, please check pbis.org, anypbis.org, or contact your trainer. Thank you very much.
Thanks.